Okay, so today we're going to learn the difference between a rational and an irrational number. And what a rational number is it's any number that can be written as a fraction. And what an irrational number is any number that can't be written as a fraction. So the nice thing is like rational and irrational, they're exact opposites of each other. So let's think about what numbers that can be written as a fraction. There's really four types. Type number one, fractions. They can be written as fractions because they're already fractions. So done. That one's easy. Whole numbers. Whole numbers can be written as a fraction because if you have 4, you can just turn that into 4 over 1. Same thing if it's negative, because if you have negative 4, you could just turn it into negative 4 over 1. That's type 2. Type 3 is what we call as terminating decimals. So if we had the decimal 0.123, we know that we could write that as a fraction because we could call that 123 over 1,000 because this is the thousandths place, so you just can tell, like you can change that decimal pretty easily into a fraction. The one that's a little bit harder to change into a fraction, I won't do it in this video, but what you can also do is repeating decimals. Now, the example that's easy to see for repeating decimals is like 3 repeating. So if you have 3 repeating, we know that that's 1/3. So any repeating decimal can be written as a fraction. So any fraction, any whole number, any terminating decimal, and any repeating decimal. Those are all examples of numbers you can write as a fraction, so they are rational. So you might go, what is irrational? Well, irrational is any decimal that does not terminate or repeat. Like an example of this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ... That you can't write as a fraction because there's no way that you can determine where this thing is going to stop. So I don't know how far to go out for the thousandths or the 100,000ths or the millions because it goes on forever. And because it doesn't repeat, there's no trick to change it into a fraction. Another example of this would be pi, because pi is like 3.1415, I don't know the rest of the digits, but it doesn't terminate and it doesn't repeat. Another example of this would be the square root of 27, because the square root of 27 is not a perfect square. So if it's not a perfect square, it's going to form some decimal that doesn't stop and doesn't repeat. Well, let's see what that decimal is because I'm just curious. See how you have a whole bunch of digits and they don't repeat and they do not stop. They only stop because our calculator can't go out far enough. So that's another example right there. The only last thing you want to think about is what happens when we add rational numbers and irrational numbers. So this, again, rational numbers are anything that can be written as a fraction. So any fraction, any whole number, any terminating decimal, any repeating decimal. And then irrational is any decimal that goes on forever and doesn't repeat. So let's think about what would happen if we combine the two. So just imagine we had a rational number or some kind of fraction, so like 5. And you were going to add pi to it. Well, if we did 5 plus pi, the 5 would add with 3, so we get 8. And then the pi decimals would get added, so that'd be like 1, 4, 1, 5, ... And you'd go, what kind of number is this? Well, this would be an irrational number, and the reason it would be an irrational number is it is a non-terminating, non-repeating decimal. So if you add a rational plus an irrational, you get a irrational. That kind of makes sense because if you couldn't stop that decimal from repeating before, it's not going to stop, or if you couldn't stop it and make it stop at a certain point, it's not going to stop now by adding something that doesn't have a decimal. Same thing is if you think about, like, if you had pi plus pi, it's still, like, the answer to this would still be irrational because of the fact that you adding these two decimals together isn't going to stop them from going on forever and not repeating. So that's kind of how those things work. Same with subtraction. Rational plus irrational is obviously rational because if you add two fractions together, it stays as a fraction or some kind of whole number which can be written as a fraction. So there's a lot of combinations you can kind of do with this. I would try some examples. The easiest way too is just, if they ever ask you, just pick some kind of irrational number and some rational number on your calculator, add them together and see what happens, or multiply or divide. But kind of go through and think that way.